Hey everybody, I'm Anna. I'm getting John set up here, and he's on his way. So
Okay, hi Anna, how you doing?
good. How are you?
Okay.
Sure that looks clear.
Hello, everybody.
How are you?
John.
Good. How are you?
How you doing?
Okay, that's good.
I am good.
Good.
So I'm just making sure this looks right, Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see it fading in and out?
Yeah. 1 second. Okay, John, we've got you set up.
Alrighty, let me go get my.
Okay. There we go. I did it on PowerPoint instead, so it shouldn't blink anymore.
So we were live on our website. The live streaming service works too well. But it is now hidden. So, and I muted everyone, so nobody heard anything. So anyway, we're currently hidden now. So we're back to okay. What's up?
Dr. Scheinberg, he's having some confusion. He wondered if you could call him.
Okay. Number?
512.
Yep.
626. 0512.
Is this on?
My computer
It's on.
So if
Okay.
he needs anything,
Go ahead.
Usually there's a green.
Hold on, actually, sorry.
Yeah, this one's a little bit different. But no, it's on. I've been using it.
Okay.
What's the number again?
512.
All right, thank you.
626.
Yep.
0512.
Okay.
Thank you, Thomas.
No problem.
And I wonder if I just. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch pockets.
Hey, John, it's Thomas calling from the museum. Can you hear me?
Ready? Does that tie look okay?
Yep, it looks nice and straight.
Alrighty.
There we go.
Hey guys.
Hello, hello.
Hey John, Vernon, you look dapper.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have you guys had a chance to watch any of the conference yet?
I have not. I have not.
It's been going pretty good. You know, it started at 11 o'clock Eastern. And so, you know, about 3 full hours of recorded presentations. And then we moved to the live panel. So, you know, we had over 1,200 folks pre-register for it.
Wow.
And then it's also being broadcast right now on Facebook and live stream and a number of platforms. So I think the numbers are going to be absolutely huge.
That's fantastic.
Yep. There's John. I see him.
All right. Hey, John, could you move your chair forward at all?
Okay. Nick, just whatever, it doesn't matter, and I'll grab it in just a second. I think we're going to do a little rehearsal first, and then.
You guys think that's better?
Is that okay,
I think that's
Thomas?
better.
Uh-oh, I
Um,
can't hear
all
anything.
right.
Yeah, he's on the video, but he
Yep.
can't hear us yet.
I can hear.
There you go. Okay.
How do you like my new background? Like I'm in a cath lab, but I'm not really in a cath lab.
I have my volume down. Here we go. All right, so just so you all know,
And then Anna or somebody's
we are
gonna do the
currently
countdown.
recording, and it'll be edited out when we do the post-production. We are currently live streaming to YouTube, and we are going to make that link active on our website for the conference at 1:38-ish.
And we're missing John Carley.
Oh, are we still? Oh, geez.
Yes.
Okay, that's all right. We got time. So we have a screensaver that'll go up. Everybody's camera will be turned off. And then we're going to turn John's camera on at 1:40 to begin. And at that time, I'll start pulling everybody else's camera. So you'll get a prompt that'll say, you know, host is asking you to start video. So you can start the video. And then we're going to remain muted while John does the introductions. He's going to go around and introduce everybody. And then once he's finished, he has a lead-in question to somebody specifically, and that'll begin the discussion. So when he gives your introduction, there's no need for a response on your end.
Yeah, and it's just going to be a short introduction, guys, because your bio is in the program. And I'd encourage you to go to the DZ Conference website. Tomorrow, the entire program will be put up on the website. If you're viewing it live now, you could go and watch the award ceremony, but you can also download the program. And so your pictures, your bio, and all of that information is included in the program. So I think we just got to wait on John Carly. I see Stasia on there, and
She's for the next.
right, but she
can watch,
okay.
and she'll just have her video on.
Ah, brownie. Oh. No, I'll get it. Don't worry about it. We've been here for many hours, guys. Nick is good enough to sneak out and get me some food.
All I can get you is a brownie.
No, that's great.
I got you a Coke. I don't know.
No, the brownie is great.
Not like me, who just goes out and gets pizza and then doesn't come back with anything for anybody else.
You know what that's called? That's called one way.
Uh-huh.
Man. So I asked Hannah to call John.
Okay, John Carly.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm going to give just a little intro, guys, about policing in 2020, how turbulent it's been. I'm going to talk about the pandemic, our COVID task force, and then the protest. And just like we did in the rehearsal, you know, feel free to talk and kind of go on. I'll start it off with John Carly, go to Vernon, and then probably go to Becker, and then John, end up with you for the end of the first round questions. But, you know, you guys did fantastic in the rehearsal. We went 42 minutes just, you know, through one series of questions. So I think this will be really good. Okay. All right. So John Carly will be joining us in just a minute.
Great.
John, I'm going to step away for 1 second.
Yep.
I'll be right
No, that's fine. And this is the real museum behind us, Vernon. It's not a screenshot like last time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So with our guys, my guys checking in, where should I be so I know that they're in? I mean, we can't talk to them, right? You're just going to make sure they're in. And
Well, I can send them. I don't know.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone.
Hey, John, how you doing?
John?
Beef, how's it going?
Like I see Stasia's there.
John Carly, just to go over, so I've got a little intro that I'm going to be doing, you know, a short monologue. Then I'll introduce each one of you. You'll be on mute the entire time.
Stacia,
And then
Gerald,
I'm going to throw the
Smythe,
first question to
Mary.
you, John Carly, and then
Mary's
everybody can be unmuted after that.
Ludite.
yeah, well, I'm a Luddite myself.
That works for me.
All righty. Have you had a chance to watch any of the conference?
Yeah, I started this morning with the opener and intro, and then into starting into the officer safety wellness. So really like what I'm seeing. So this is good.
Well, good. And I think there's, again, it features so many of y'all, but your little nuggets of information. And we started off with over 1,200 registrants, and the numbers skyrocketed from there once it started going across the other platforms. So there's going to be a lot of traction on this. And then starting tomorrow, it'll all be housed on the DZ website where you can watch the entire conference, including the live panels in one session. I think, Thomas, we got about 15 minutes. If anybody needs to go away or take a break, is that correct? Or 10?
That'll work. I'm going to break away for a second. And,
okay.
The world of Zoom, but it's good.
Okay. John Becker, if you could, elaborate a little bit more. I mean, again, I told you, this can't be a commercial, but elaborate a little bit more how this virtual world has affected you in treatment. Because I think that's interesting to know that you guys are now providing care, kind of across the country, that this is not a local issue. This is a national issue. And that officers in 2020 in this, a perfect storm of policing, pandemic, and COVID, are reaching out and seeking help.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I'd be more than happy to touch on that stuff. So, and that's easy. So,
okay.
Yeah.
You want to try it without the headset? Oh, look, it just went away.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can't, without it, it just doesn't work. There's no microphone anywhere near my thing.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. It's cool. It looks official. Yeah.
Looks official. Okay.
All right. So before we put up the screensaver, we have to put up the screensaver just as a reminder, everybody, so that we can begin the live stream so that it's playing on the website when we begin. So just a really quick run of show. When John comes on, he's going to begin introductions. So everybody remain muted. He's going to go through and give the introduction to everybody. There's no need to respond. And then he has his lead-in question, and that'll begin the discussion. So we have 45 minutes for the discussion, approximately 15 minutes for a Q&A if we need it. But I'll be giving John and Anna prompts as to when we need to start wrapping up. So we only have 5 minutes in between John and Nick's panel. So we're going to have a hard stop at 2:45. So just work that in. And at 2:30, Nick and his panelists are going to be on. They're all being asked to join without video. So we should not see them when they join the panel. And then at 2:45, everybody can just stop their video. So I'm going to go ahead and got it. I hear you, Anna, or read you, Anna. So I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody and take you off video. Is there any other questions before we get started?
I have a quick question for you. When we are in the conference with John and he's asking the questions, do we unmute and mute ourselves, or is that something you're all going to do for us? How does that work?
Yep. Yeah, you guys can do that. Yep.
Okay.
That'll be easiest. If I mute you, you'll need me to prompt you to unmute yourself.
Okay.
So that'll be fine. All right. Okay, everybody. It's 1:36. I'm going to mute and turn off everybody's video. And right at 1:40, John, you'll be ready to go. I will ask you to start your video at that time.
Good afternoon. I'm John Matthews, the Executive Director of Law Enforcement Initiatives for the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. And thank you for joining us today to watch this live panel session on policing in 2020. And let me tell you, 2020 for all of us has been a turbulent time. We've had protest, we've had pandemic, and we've had the normal stresses of policing. Officers having to deal with their work schedule, extended hours, their family life, Zoom calls, Zoom meetings, at-home schooling. It's been absolutely amazing what our officers have had to deal with in 2020. And today we're going to talk with a distinguished panel of experts from the medical field, mental health, law enforcement, and even some Destination Zero winners to tell us how they've made it through 2020 and what they're going to do for the rest of the year. Policing in a pandemic and protest and in our normal environment. Now, I've been asked to tell you, if you're not participating in our live Zoom chat session, or you're watching this on the Destination Zero website at a later time, then you can email us questions directly to Destination Zero, or if you want further information. That email is Destination Zero at NLEOMF.org. Again, to email us for information or further resources, you can email Destination Zero at NLEOMF.org. And we'll be happy to respond to you both today and in the future as we play this session on the Destination Zero website. We're going to speak a significant amount today about policing during the pandemic and COVID. But let me tell you, here at the National Law Enforcement Memorial, we have formed a task force because we have so many COVID-19 line of duty deaths. As a matter of fact, right now, we're projecting that we have more line of duty deaths from COVID-19 than any other cause here in 2020. Our task force is currently intaking the information from departments across the nation, doing an investigation, and approving those names to be on the wall. So if you have an agency and you've experienced a COVID-19 death where that officer has had direct exposure and contracted COVID and died from that disease, please make sure that you contact us at Destination Zero or at the Memorial Fund so that we can properly honor your officer. Right now, the numbers that we have is over 140 cases that have been submitted to us, and we've already reviewed about 33 of those cases, but this task force is working to review many, many more. So please get us that information. Today, to kind of talk to us about policing during pandemic, protest, and in 2020, we've got a distinguished panel, and I'd like to introduce them now. Joining me today is Chief John Carley of Vacaville, California Police Department. Chief Carley in Vacaville won the 2020 General Officer Safety Destination Zero Award winner. We also have with us Director Vernon Herron from the Baltimore City Police Department. Director Herron is a manager over Officer Safety and Wellness, which houses both early intervention and the health and wellness units. And we're glad to have him on board. We also have John Becker. John is a former police officer. He is a program developer and outreach professional, and he's currently the director of the First Responder Program at the Caron Treatment Centers. And so welcome to John. Also joining us today is Dr. John Scheinberg. And John Scheinberg is a cardiologist and a lieutenant with the Lakeway Police Department. So we're trying to cover all aspects of officer safety and wellness as we make it through 2020. And Chief Carley, we understand this has been a challenging year for everyone. And from a chief standpoint, I'd really like to know, how have you directed your command staff and your officers as they've had to deal with this perfect storm of pandemic, protest, and then the normal issues that we're facing in law enforcement? Chief Carley?
Well, thank you. It has certainly been an unprecedented year, very unrecognizable for everyone in the profession. And as a leader of a police organization, trying to pave the way to support our staff and also to make sure that we continue to provide services within our communities. So it goes without saying that this is probably the most unprecedented year in most of our career. For those of us serving 30 to 40 years, nothing like this. I will say that we all can just remember where we were in 9/11. And it hasn't been since then, since I think most of our profession has felt the outpouring of support until this year. And yet it was definitely a roller coaster effect, because we went from pandemic fear to pandemic fatigue, and then all the crisis that we're seeing. And so we've got this major quandary. And one of the things that we found here in Vacaville, and I know a lot of leaders in the profession, is what do you tell your staff and how do you direct the resources during this difficult time? And I really boiled it down to 4 different areas that made it effective within our organization. And first and foremost, what we recognize is that every family was different. Every officer either had the fear or they had this invincibility effect that like nothing's going to hurt me, and trying to manage those resources. So we saw from patient 0, which occurred here in Vacaville, the first community spread of COVID in the United States, instantly trying to address what do we do when we begin to have to face a quarantine, and how do you develop a resource strategy to make sure that you've got officers who can actually hit the street. So it started with health check-ins, and it was simply this: a directive to commanders to really pay attention to all the staff individually. We know that there's HIPAA protected information, and you really can't publicly go out and say, hey, listen, if you have comorbidity issues, raise your hand. You just don't do that. So what you do is you have the individual conversations to say, it's okay if you have health risks in your family, or if you yourself have these predetermined health risks that could put you at risk. And no one needs to be the hero if you need to take care of yourself. And go to HR, we will support you, because what we need to make sure is that we can ensure your safety as you're serving the communities. And also the whole public education of how do we change the way we're responding to calls for service in a different way, the PPEs that were so desperately needed, and how can we prevent exposing others, knowing we're going from call to call to call, and ensuring what that looks like. And as we all know, it's kind of hard to build an aircraft while you're flying it, but that's what 2020 looked like for all of us in law enforcement. And also, one of the things that we had to do also is push people to take time off. When we think of wellness, everyone's vacations were canceled. You talk about the airline industry coming to a screeching halt. Well, all of our employees travel to destinations and they have nowhere to go. But what we found is we literally had to encourage people, even though that they were accruing hours, they wanted to be on the front line. And we had to systematically touch people and pull them back and say, you know, it's time for you to take time for yourself and your family before you get back in the game. Go recharge. So those 3 areas were a primary directive to commanders to say, this is your responsibility to monitor and maintain the health of our organization. And lastly, not to forget the families. Every family that watched a loved one as a first responder, an essential worker, be sent out to continue to provide services, lived in this fear. And so to make sure through resources, whether it was peer support or other entities within the organization, such as in our department, we have a wellness app through Cortico. We simply just had to find a way to make sure they had the resources as well. And so we had to make sure we made that connection. And that was the strategy here in Vacaville. And I know a lot of agencies around the country implemented similar strategies, but it certainly was something very different for all of us in 2020.
All right, thank you, Chief. And Director Herron, we heard Chief Carley mention about the peer support network and the resources that they're trying to make available to the officers. I mean, officers that have the normal stressors of police work, the stressors of the calls for service, the stressors of dealing with the public. And now you throw on top of it protest, violence, and a pandemic sweeping not only across the nation, but across the world. How have you in Baltimore tried to reach out to your officers and let them know about the resources available? And what are some of those resources?
Thank you, John. What a great question. And thank you for allowing us to be on this program. Listen, it is important to understand that in policing, we do a great job in training our officers in defense tactics, firearms range, and a litany of other things. But with policing, as you indicated earlier, there's trauma associated with law enforcement. And until recently, we have not addressed that trauma associated with our officers. Officers are exposed to a myriad of things on every day that they put on that badge and gun and go out into the community. Recently, we have trained peer support members to reach out to our officers, especially if they're impacted by COVID. You know, we have a task force. Every officer or employee who has been quarantined as a result of COVID, we check in with them on a regular basis. We make sure that they understand that we're here to support them. We have gone as far as taking food to the homes of some of our officers because everybody in the house was quarantined and no one could get out to get food for a newborn baby and things of that nature. So it's important to understand that we have made this a priority. Pandemic was not one of the things that we trained our officers on when they were coming through the academy. Civil unrest, we haven't had a lot of civil unrest training for years until recently. So it goes to show you how resilient our police officers are because they've been able to adjust on the fly and been able to maintain a level of professionalism to manage through these stresses associated with law enforcement. You know, I have to say that under the leadership of Commissioner Michael Harrison of the Baltimore City Police Department, he's allowed us to apply these strategies throughout the workforce. He gives PSAs all the time to our employees about health and wellness. And basically the message is, it's okay not to be okay. You're not going to lose your job. We're here to help you, and you will continue your career as a Baltimore City Police employee.
And it sounds like that's what we're hearing from Chief Carley and from you. It's departments that are doing a good job at handling this kind of perfect storm of policing we're facing in 2020 are being proactive. They're not waiting till the officers come to them. They're reaching out to the officers. They're letting them know services are available. They're letting them know that they can come and talk or their families can come and talk. I know personally, I've been in law enforcement 37 years, and when I have the officers come to me, they're not so much worried about themselves. They're worried about their family. They're worried about their small children or maybe their parents. But there's a lot of concerns out there. John Becker, I know you kind of deal with this mental health issues, resiliency, as well as different substance abuse issues with officers all across the country. Have you seen an uptick of officers needing help? And what are some of those services that you've been providing in this crazy year?
Yes, the good description, John. A crazy year. Law enforcement officers generally struggle with, stress, mental health disorders, anxiety. The things that are different in 2020, obviously, is the pandemic and the violence and the protest. And we've definitely seen an uptick in police officers struggling around that. The fear around the pandemic, they can't identify why they're fearful sometimes, the families and things. So what we've been able to do, in this age of virtual reality where everything's on Zoom or some other platform, we've been able to reach patients or law enforcement officers across the country to provide them telehealth services when they're struggling, and also we still do the residential part when they need to come in for that. So there's definitely an increase. We're seeing officers reach out, struggling around their anxiety and stress, not knowing, what's coming next at them. These officers serve, their whole lives in their community, protecting and providing services. And, what they're sharing with us is they're often feeling like they're being attacked or blamed for things that they had nothing to do with. And it leaves them confused and just, feeling left behind by their communities. So there's a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, law enforcement officers are very resilient, but unfortunately, they often turn to unhealthy ways to cope with things that go on. And that's when the alcohol and sometimes prescription medications come into play, to manage their sleep, to just deal with the way they're feeling or to kind of get rid of the feelings that they don't want to have. So we're seeing an increase in that. And we're addressing that both at a residential level and then also through peer support. Two of the previous speakers mentioned peer support, and it's a great piece. And in the virtual world, you can provide peer support across the country, right? And we've done that within our program to keep people connected so that when they're struggling, there's somewhere to reach out to if they can't get to a local resource.
I think it's important. They've got to be able to connect with somebody to say, I need some help. My family needs some help. And as Vernon was saying, I think it's absolutely amazing them being so proactive that the families are quarantined. They're delivering food to the families. Well, Dr. John Scheinberg, you're a cardiologist and you've got to deal with officers in their normal element. And you see on a daily basis the stress and the physical toll that it takes on our police officers. Can you give us any sense of what it's like in 2020 that we've had the normal stresses plus the protest and the pandemic, and give us some guidance? What do we do, John?
So, yeah, John, you're absolutely right. It's been sort of a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm of a disaster. And as these gentlemen have mentioned, we have a situation where there's a substantial amount of increased physical stress from working long shifts. Breaks are less frequent. It's been an incredible amount of emotional and mental stress. And you take these problems and you overlay it on a group of people that have historically have been at a substantially increased risk of heart disease. So you take someone to speak in a more sort of direct term, you take someone who already has a higher risk of high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and now you take this individual and you make them work 12-hour shifts 6 or 7 days a week because they're on call for protests. More people are out, so they're sick, and they have to do officer backfill. So the shifts are longer. The stress associated with it is longer because they feel abandoned by their communities. They feel abandoned and victimized by what's going on in their cities. So you have this group of people who are already at risk, who now you throw an additional level of stress on. And to be, as a cardiologist, to be looking at this from a medical standpoint, what do we do when this happens? Well, you stop exercising. You increase your alcohol intake. You eat comfort food, which is typically carbohydrate-laden food. So you sit home, you don't have the time to exercise, you may not have the emotional wherewithal to realize, hey, this is what I need, and I'd rather just sit home and rest. So the exercise isn't getting done, the diet's not being followed, work shifts are longer and harder. So you take this group of people, which predominantly has a significantly increased risk of coronary disease, and you're making the significant problem already worse. So these mental stressors that these other distinguished gentlemen have really mentioned are taking a physical toll. And I'm not even talking about, which we'll get into in a moment, John, how do you deal with the actual virus, which is a separate issue. But the anticipation of the virus and the stress that it causes is causing a exacerbation of the underlying problems that we all have as law enforcement officers.
Well, and doctor, one of the things that we talk about frequently is heart attacks and cardiac disease. Can you tell us some of those other medical conditions that you're seeing and that we need to be concerned about and we need to be proactively addressing?
Absolutely. And this goes on irrespective of the pandemic, irrespective of the defund movement, and irrespective of the riots, protests that we're having. As cops, we see a disproportional amount of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and death and disability from coronary disease. It's the number one killer when you extrapolate it and make it into a 24-hour situation. So we see a situation in which normal police officers have a standard of work cycle, which is mostly routine, mundane tasks, punctuated by short periods of terror, this 98% boredom, 2% terror stress pattern, which has been shown to cause plaque in the arteries to rupture. You take this underlying problem, which has been existing in our profession for decades, or I would imagine since the dawn of the profession, and then you throw these other stressors on it, and you make these underlying problems worse. So increasing diet problems, decreasing exercise, diabetes goes up, hypertension goes up, the risk of coronary disease goes up. So it not only takes a toll on that individual at the moment, it makes that individual less physically able to respond to stress and less able to deal with the problems that they would not only normally see, but now they're seeing it on a 12-hour shift as opposed to 4 10-hour shifts. They're seeing it in situations in which this chronic unremitting, relentless stress is present. And by staying unhealthy, we make ourselves less able to cope with it.
So we've got an environment that is very our stress level is maxed out. The officers are tired. They're working extra. They're coming home. They're having to deal with their family life. They're having to deal with the stressors of their family, maybe fearing they've been exposed to COVID. They're not working out as much. Maybe they're drinking more, or their alcohol intake is certainly increasing. Director Herron, I mean, how do we address these individuals that are now turning maybe to prescription medication or alcohol to just adapt and make it through the day?
So one of the things that we really have to do, John, is let our employees understand that as a result of the trauma associated in law enforcement, if they become alcoholics or addicted, it's not their fault. We've known this for years. I grew up in the Maryland State Police, and I can tell you the number of my colleagues who became alcoholics, and we had nothing to help them with. We terminate them and wouldn't let them be troopers anymore, but we wouldn't try to help them. The number of troopers I worked with over 27 and a half years who committed suicide, we blame the troopers. We said they must have been weak. It's really not their fault. It's our fault. For the first time in history, we finally recognize that we are just as responsible for the trauma associated in law enforcement, more responsible than employees. So in Baltimore, here's one of the things that we're doing. We have an alcohol prevention program or identification program. Commissioner Harris has allowed us to engage our officers on a regular basis about alcohol abuse. Over the past several years, more than 50 of our police employees have voluntarily checked themselves into an alcohol rehab facility, and they were not punished. And they went in for 30 days, they got the treatment. Now they're still recovering, but they're back and they're pursuing their career. We have to understand that these men and women are human like everyone else. But in addition to the problems that everyone has, add police work, add COVID, add civil unrest and protests and things of this nature. So I think we are making headway with this. We are convincing our officers and employees that if they come forward with a problem, we'll identify the problem, we'll get them help, and they will not lose their job. I got a call one night from an officer who I know that was struggling. And he was incoherent. And I asked him where he was. And he said, I'm just driving around. He said, I can't take this anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, I can't take it anymore. And I say, listen, drive yourself to the nearest hospital and check yourself into the mental ward. And the first question he asked me was, if I do this, am I going to lose my job? This is what we've done to our officers. They've been impacted by trauma. They fall prey to it. They need the help. So instead of us helping them, we've been like saying, well, you can no longer be a police officer. That officer went and got the help that he needed, found out that the medication that he was on was the wrong medication, got on the right medication, and within the last year or so, he's been promoted to sergeant. So we have to understand that we have to be able to reach out to these officers, provide them the resources. We have a 24-hour EAP, BHS. Officers can call me or a peer support member directly, and they are guaranteed confidentiality and they're guaranteed help.
Well, and I think it's so important that our officers know that we do have these programs that are in place and that their peers need to support them, that they need to call and let you know, hey, I think this officer is struggling. Can you reach out to him? Can we visit with him? Can we get him the treatment that he needs in a timely manner? These officers are our most expensive asset. They're our best asset. Our personnel are what makes our department what it is. And in the past, we may have thrown that away. We have to keep that asset close to us, and we have to take care of that asset. Chief Carley, I asked you about how your command staff was responding to this. Give me a little insight to how your officers that, are maybe young officers, new parents, they have young families. How are they dealing with the stresses today, and how are you helping them deal with some of these stresses?
You know, what's interesting is just walking around the station and out in the Sally Port and in the E-lots and talking to officers as they're coming and going or on calls. And there's a common thread is they're conversing about what home life looks like. And you can always tell the joking stress because they're really telling the difficult story when they left for work that day. And I heard a couple of officers share the story. One of the most difficult things that they're dealing with, especially young families, is the schools being shut down has created, especially when you've got more than one person working at home, who's going to take the kids to Zoom school? And you would think just all the stress that our officers are under, the sense of, okay, who's going to help them with their homework, who's staying home from work, the policies that say that, okay, you're going to have to stay home from work and now I'm going to have to pay overtime for somebody else because that's a real personal issue. And secondly, the need to make sure that the home life is actually healthy. I know for a fact in these conversations that I've heard is there's a lot more arguments at home. And it has a lot to do with the pressures of home life. And as we know, you don't leave home life at home, you bring it to work, and it begins to already affect a difficult time dealing with the 2020 pandemic and all the protests and policing. So it is definitely impacting the home life, in so much that even some employees have asked, and we've afforded them the ability to work split shifts. And we said, we'll make whatever needs to adjust a person's schedule, knowing that their life is upside down. And even as much as it's our responsibility to make sure that we're delivering the services, we have to think of this not as a new norm, but temporarily it is the norm that we're in until we get through it. It's a huge impact on the family.
That's really innovative, Chief. That's the first time I've heard someone doing that. So you're allowing your officers to split their shifts. So you're still getting the coverage you need, but it's helping them with their home life.
As much as possible, we will do what we can to, even though they're deemed essential, if we can fill the shifts or their assignment and allow for an adjustment, we're trying to be as flexible as possible, knowing that there will be an end to this pandemic and to everything that this year has brought us. And we can't lose sight of our greatest asset as the employee. So the creativity to do whatever it takes to ensure that they can be strong through this and they can support their home life. Because if that gets destroyed or disrupted, they're going to be of no value either on that day or in the months and years to come.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent. John Becker, you've been on both sides of this. As a law enforcement officer, you've seen the officer of safety and wellness from that side. You now see it in your new position as a director over there at Karen. Kind of give me an idea. How do the officers deal with the stresses that they're facing? And do we still have that barrier, that wall about reaching out for services and getting help? I mean, it's one thing if the chief overhears a conversation and says, hey, let me help you. But how many officers are really coming forward? Because as he said, we don't have an option. We have to go to work. We are essential and we're out there serving the public. So kind of give me an idea from both sides as an officer and a clinician, what you're seeing and how do we address that?
Sure. So as a clinician, absolutely I've seen the culture shift, especially, leadership, the administrators, moving away from punishment when an officer has, either a mental health or a substance problem, to providing treatment, getting them help and getting them back to work. Unfortunately, the stigma associated to either mental health or substance use issues still exist within law enforcement, right? And it's that undercurrent of, don't be weak, we're the helpers, we help people, we solve problems. When we show up somewhere, we're in charge, we're in control. So it makes it very difficult for a first responder to put up their hand and say, hey, I need help. For a police officer to say, you know what, I can't handle this myself is very difficult. So I think the message that we're hearing today, and I think it's important that it continues, is that administrators let their members know, let their officers know that it's okay to ask for help, right? And not just, say that and put it into a policy, but follow that up with action that really demonstrates that is the truth. That if you ask for help, that you're going to be, you're going to get it and you're going to be okay. That stigma is very difficult for law enforcement officers to fight against, and that undercurrent still exists. So to answer your question, although it's gotten better, certainly, 20 years ago, the resources that are available, programs like mine at Karen and some others, weren't available, right? And peer support wasn't what it is today. So those things have gotten incredibly more available and accessible for law enforcement. But it's still, when we look at a national, from a national view, it's still out there that there's that fear and that attitude that, it's his problem or her problem.
And John Scheinberg, with that, we're hearing about the substance abuse, we're hearing about the mental health issues, the treatment that we need, the peer counseling, the proactive outreach from all the other speakers. Before we start talking about COVID, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to spend just a few minutes talking to us about the tests that we can do, how easy they are, and how we can identify some of these physical issues that are manifesting themselves in our law enforcement community that may take a life right now or down the road in a little bit.
Okay, so that's a really great segue from what John Becker just said, because a lot of times in the other aspects that we're talking about, there's a problem. It just has to be identified and it has to be acted on. In the world I live in, as a cop and a cardiologist, my job is to keep cops alive. And a lot of the things that I see are something that are not easily identifiable. In fact, you cannot look at someone and identify whether that individual is at a substantially increased risk of just dropping dead from a heart problem. The old concept of, I can look at some guy, I know this guy has a heart attack waiting to happen, he's overweight, and he's sedentary. That plays true to a certain extent, but without even looking at law enforcement, we all know people that are marathon runners or triathletes who just drop dead. So heart disease, again, which is one of the leading killers of cops, if not the number one killer, is not always apparent. So we actually have to be proactive to go out and identify it. And fortunately, our knowledge and our technology has gotten to the point now where we can begin to identify heart disease before it becomes a clinical problem. In other words, before people feel it. Just like my colleagues are talking about identifying problems before someone has a significant issue, a suicide or whatnot, my world is identical. We want to identify these problems. And there's certain things that can easily and inexpensively be done to identify people who are at risk. Before someone has a heart attack, there are significant inflammatory changes that occur within the arteries of the heart. Those changes are very easily picked up on certain blood tests. Those blood tests are inflammatory marker tests. The specific one that I'm referring to right now is something called phospholipase A2, or it's abbreviated at P as in Papa, L as in Lima, A as in Alpha 2, PLA2. This is a very inexpensive blood test that can identify inflammatory changes in a heart attack 5 years before that heart attack before that blockage creates a heart attack. We can also identify the little flecks of calcium in the arteries that occur before plaque becomes bad enough to cause a heart attack. And those calcifications are identified on a very low dose radiation and inexpensive CT scan called a calcium score. So we take these two tools, a biochemical test from a blood test, which is the PLA2, and the calcium score, and we can identify these people. And again, it's not always apparent. It's not the big guy in the room. Sometimes it's the 40-year-old SWAT operator who PTs every day. Now, this increasing stress level that we're all undergoing. And when I say all, I don't just mean us in the law enforcement business. It's a universal problem across the board. Everybody's eating poorly. Everyone has reduced their exercise program. Most people are coping by poor coping mechanisms, increasing alcohol. You take those issues and you put them on what I said is an increased risk in the general population, and it makes this testing I'm describing even more valuable because we can keep these names off the wall if we pick this low-hanging fruit. And this, if anything good is going to come out of this pandemic, let it be something that gives us the ability to be a little bit more proactive in keeping ourselves and our colleagues in this profession mentally fit and physically fit and healthy.
And if you didn't get the specific test Dr. Scheinberg talked about, you can email us again, destination0@nleomf.org, and we'll get you the name of those specific tests. And I take it, John, those are tests that you could go to nearly any doctor and take, or do you have to go to a cardiologist?
So it's a good question. My recommendation is this place to start is with anybody's personal physician. Like shopping for a car, we have to be the educated consumer. You have to know what you need before you go into the doctor's office. This isn't the 1950s where you go to a doctor's office and you sit there and they say, okay, here's what you need, goodbye. We are educated consumers of medical care. And it's up to us to go and say, hey, I haven't had my colonoscopy. I haven't had a mammography done in years. Isn't that something I should have? Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention it to you. I'm a 50-year-old male. Do I need to check colon, prostate? So we need to be our own advocates. And those tests I mentioned are something that any physician can do. Some may not do them regularly and may need to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. Let me try to get those for you. Or this is where you can go. But any physician can order these tests. They're widely available.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to turn this very last session over and specifically address the COVID issue. And I'm going to just go around fairly quickly. And in the last few minutes we have here, Chief Carley, what are some of the things that you have done to keep your officers safe on the street? That all of those watching live on Zoom, watching on the website, or viewing it later on this week, what are some of those great tidbits that you're doing to keep your officers safe that you can share with the rest of us?
Well, first and foremost, it comes down to make sure you're fit and ready for work. And so the distractions and all the stress is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. We certainly know with all the protests over the summer and the challenges, there's a lot of angst about whether or not we go from this position where the public really is believing in their first responders to the public is questioning everything. And so I've tried to help them understand and imagine that there is tremendous support and to not lose sight of that, because some of our greatest abilities to stay safe is the continued partnership with a community that really does believe in what we do, and not to lose sight of how that community policing and that partnering ensures greater safety, not only to individual officers, but an entire community. And that trickles through an organization, and that public trust translates into organizational health. So clearly the ability to focus and not lose sight of what safety looks like, keep your guard up when it comes to physical safety, but also not to lose sight of the fact that this is a real disease, and to maintain the recommendations of personal protection equipment, and to practice that safety all the time during this period is paramount, and to not let this fatigue, including the pandemic fatigue, cause us to at some point lose sight of what it really is going to look like when we get into 2021.
Well, Chief, one of the things that we're balancing here, though, is we're trying to keep our officers safe. We're recommending wearing their PPEs. We're modifying how they take calls for service. How do you communicate that to the community so you don't look aloof, that you still embrace your tenets of community policing, that you have that bridge that you're building with them?
Well, and for example, it's really hard when we go from a community policing environment to being asked to act as if code enforcement means we become the mask police, and everything that really is about upholding a health order. And so one of the things is to simply acknowledge that there is a risk, but to help inform the public that, for example, there's a differing view about in public, should a police officer have their mask on? Well, if you're trying to communicate, and so much verbal communication is facial expression, reading lips, and clear communication from dialogue, if you can maintain that safe distance, such as a traffic stop or a high risk environment, there is a time when maybe a mask is inappropriate. And to be able to educate the public to say, if we're going to be in your home and it's safe to do so, we will do so with a mask. But maybe there's times when we're trying to give clear, succinct, and direct orders that blocking the face is actually detrimental to the public safety of the officer, or even receiving clear direction from a citizen in a tense environment. So that's just one example of understanding where it's not as easy as say, put on a mask or keep distance, but maybe looking at this as a high risk environment to say, it might just be important that the officer starts without a mask on. And that's always a discussion, but that is clearly an example.
But and you're having to educate the public. So yes, just like Director Herron talked about educating his officers and having them seek help, you're having to educate the public to let them know, hey, this is how we're operating in this COVID time period.
Absolutely. And alternatives to general report taking might be, whether it's on the phone or online, and creating these opportunities to help people as they navigate the risks of the pandemic, and also as we're trying to maintain not only public order and public safety, but the public sentiment of trust that when the pandemic is over, we don't want to look back and say somehow, we disengaged and we lost this relationship with the public that we hold so delicately. And so that comes with extra communication for public expectations on what we will and what we won't do, always with a desire to maintain public safety, but to assure that those services are going to continue. Constant communication.
And Director Herron, you're across the country, going from California all the way over to Baltimore. Tell us a little bit of the procedures that you've put in place during COVID-19 to help protect your officers and to reach out to them so that they feel comfortable in letting you know, hey, I may have been exposed, I may need to quarantine, so that you can address it from a department perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So, in law enforcement, police officers rely on their God-given senses, their touch, their smell, their sight, their hearing. COVID, you can't see COVID. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. You can't smell it. We have to keep educating our officers that it's there, because COVID fatigue has caused us to lose 2 members of our family. And it's important to understand that until we get on the other side of this, every officer and every peer support member and every colleague, they're responsible for their brother's keeper. They all have to engage one another and remind one another. Now, we see an officer on the, of course, we give them their PPE and we give them training and so forth, but it is a cooperative approach with the Baltimore City Health Department, the fire department, social services. All the agencies are working together to educate the public and also educate our officers. We have to understand that you have to take care of yourselves. You have to continue to wash your hands and wear your mask. You have to go home and protect your family as well. At some point, we're going to get on the other side of this, but until then, we have to maintain this discipline of 6 feet distancing, wearing your mask, washing your hands, and looking out for one another. And the first sign that you think you might be ill, our officers have to call our task force unit. And the task force unit will put them in quarantine for 14 days until they get tested. We have rapid testing or frequent testing for our officers. So we have to keep doing all these things. I learned a lot from the Johns on the panel today. So we're going to take this information back and use it in Baltimore. And that's what we have to do. Collectively, all have to work together.
Well, and let me tell you, I know that I saw one of your cases come across my desk and sorry to hear for your loss up there in Baltimore. But as I said earlier, we have over 140 reported cases to us of COVID-19 direct exposure deaths in law enforcement. Unfortunately, we feel that number is going to climb. And again, I just want to repeat, if you are a law enforcement agency or chief executive, you did have a COVID-19 death, make sure that you notify us here at the National Law Enforcement Memorial. You can email us at that destination zero at NLEOMF.org address, and we will quickly process that line of duty death in hopes of honoring your hero next year. John Becker, I want to turn to you and kind of talk a little bit of your experience. Have you had a lot of people reaching out to you about COVID-19 and about the pressures that has put on them, in addition to the standard things that you hear about every single day?
Yeah, absolutely, John. That's probably the number one call that I get lately. Whether there's substance use involved or not, that's my primary job. But law enforcement consistently has been reaching out around the stress associated to the pandemic, fear for their families, fear for themselves, that unknown. As law enforcement, we face threats all the time. And as Vernon said, you can see that, we can kind of make sense of that. One of the things that officers are really struggling with is trying to make sense of what's going on, in the community and with this pandemic. So that's a big part of what's going on and what they're struggling with when they do reach out. So it's definitely increased.
But I tell you, our officers are doing such an amazing job. And someone said it earlier, we're essential workers. We don't get to go home. We have to show up at work. We're not locking ourselves down or separating ourselves from the community. And even with all of this stress, I've got to tell you, walking into the museum today, I'm walking down 7th Street in Washington, D.C. I see a pair of officers, Metro Transit officers, and they walk into a Dunkin' Donuts. And I go, well, okay, that seems about appropriate. And I see them buy a couple of sandwiches, and they walked out and gave the sandwiches to not one, but 2 different homeless people in 2 places around the Metro stop. And it took pause a little bit with me, because I said, you know what? That's not abnormal either. Over the last 3 decades, I've seen officers reach into their pocket and do amazing things. And I couldn't just let it go. I had to go identify myself and talk to the officers and say, hey, what's going on? I just saw you walk in, buy some sandwiches, but you came out and gave them to people. And they said, hey, this is our beat. We're here every day. We see these people and they need to be fed. We're just trying to help out. John Becker, I mean, that's that mentality of caring that our officers demonstrate on a regular basis, despite the pressure of policing, despite the pandemic, and despite the protest.
Yeah, law enforcement are some of the most empathetic and caring people you're going to find. And even in the chaos of what's going on across the country with the pandemic, with the protests, with the defunding movement, they're still putting their belt on every morning, strapping on, going to work and doing the job and going above and beyond, right? They're not angry about it for the most part. They're doing what they need to do and helping the community. So I see it as my job, our job, to make sure we're helping them and keeping them healthy so they can continue to do that. And that's what drives me with the work that I do.
That is just awesome. And John Scheinberg, Dr. Scheinberg, I saw the officers today. They're working with the homeless. They've got their masks on. They've got their protective gear. They're maintaining a safe distance. But let us know, what are some of those things that we need to be doing in this COVID environment? Because as I said, the question that I get from young officers, they're not so much concerned about themselves, but they're concerned about their wife, their young children, or their parents at home. How can we give them some advice to help them protect themselves and their families? Your mic.
There we go. Sorry about that, John.
What's the question?
That's a great question. And I'd first like to echo what Chief Carley said, and that is, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. For example, I don't know, felony traffic stop. If you're muted through a microphone and you can't hear anything, you muted through a mask and you can't hear anything, it's really not proper to wear a mask. Safety has to come first. The situation that we have in terms of trying to protect yourself is simple common sense. It's common sense in terms of wear your mask when you can, wear your PPE when you can. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, can you hear me?
No, you're
Yep.
doing fine, John. I'm
Okay,
getting
sorry.
some questions that are coming
I'm
in
sorry.
over the chat.
Okay. The other thing that, especially what you mentioned, John, is about bringing stuff home. And it's a real concern, and it's a scary concern. So what I recommend are two very simple things. Disinfect your kit, disinfect your gear. When you get home, disrobe in the laundry room. Put on a clean set of clothes before you bring your clothes into the house. Wipe your duty belt down. How often are you touching your belt constantly throughout the day? Get some wipes and wipe it down after every interaction. Wipe it down before you go home. Wipe down all your individual gear and your belt. And when you get home, get changed and take off your shoes. Don't bring any sort of contaminant into the house. If you do that, you should have the best reduction in risk of carrying any of these pathogens back into the house. The wipes are inexpensive. They're common. They're easy to get. If you can't get a hold of wipes, you can make a very simple solution out of 1/3 a cup of bleach within a gallon of water, and that can be used to wipe things down. And there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that is, I've seen it 100 times. You get into a car, if you don't have the luxury of having a take-home car that's your own vehicle, and you share a vehicle, and you get into the vehicle at the beginning of your shift, wipe the vehicle down. Forget about what's in there. I mean, there's not only sandwich remnants and Coke cans and everything sitting around the floor, but grab a wipe the steering wheel down, wipe the computer, the CAD down, wipe the seat down, wipe the microphone down. And if you do, you're actually going to reduce contact and reduce the chance of spreading the pathogens. And this isn't just COVID. This is sort of common sense in any type of contaminant or any type of pathogen that we would come involved with.
Great hints. I mean, these are easy things that we can do. Common practices, washing your hands, using the sanitizer, wiping down your squad car. I love the idea of wiping down your equipment and getting changed, before you go into your house. Fantastic. John Carley, do you have any other tidbits, bits of information you can give us that you've seen your officers do, or they do as they end their shift or as they are going about their work to take care of themselves?
Yeah, like the other comments, it's really about paying attention to the things that you would typically overlook. We have stations near the entrance of all of our facilities with touchless devices, so that when you touch the handrail, the next thing you do is you can place your hand underneath a disinfectant without touching anything. And then you're instantly disinfecting the common touch points. Propping doors open within the building so that we're not constantly touching and coming behind somebody that may be transferring it. Those are if there ever was low hanging fruit in being able to eliminate your ability to transfer this disease, it's things like that. So it really is a common sense approach. And it absolutely is making sure that our staff, our officers, have the disinfectants, have the spray bottles, have the bottles that are in their side pocket. So after every call, they just disinfect. It goes back to general hygiene. And I think that if we can just encourage the common sense approach, that also goes a long way into helping our officers feel like that they're in control of something. And it's probably long overdue that we live a more hygienic behavior in our life. It's just that through this pandemic, not to do it just so that we get through it, but maybe a change in lifestyle that just makes us all healthier.
Thank you very much. I mean, all of that is really, really important. I want to get to a question. We've got some questions coming in on the live chat. Someone asked, hey, if I need resources, if I need some assistance, how can Destination Zero help me as an individual officer? Well, there's two different ways. One, you can go to the website, destinationsero.org. We have a safety resources section. In that section, which is a totally searchable database, you can look at over 270, I think it is, successful and award-winning programs that deal with officer safety and wellness. Agencies can go in there and copy from other agencies. Why not find out those successful programs? Download the information, the videos, the brochures, anything that you need from the Safety Resource Center. So you can go to destinationsero.org. You can also email us at Destination Zero. If you have a specific question or comment, you can say, hey, I know someone that needs some help. I'm in this agency or this region. What can you offer? We have an entire network of Destination Zero winners and finalists that we call upon. We have our DZ alumni group. And just this week, we had somebody call. They needed information. It was a chaplain who needed some information on a line of duty death and approaching the family. And we were able to reach out to our DZ alumni group and say, does anybody have this data, have this information that would assist him? Got the information within an hour, got back to the respondent. So I would encourage you to email us, to go to the Destination Zero website. And as you can see, the great professionals that we have on the panel today, we have access to scores of experts all over the United States in the medical field, in the mental health field, in officer safety and wellness, as well as all of our award-winning national programs like you've seen throughout the day-to-day. So let us know about that. If you do have a concern, like I said, email it to us. We'll keep it confidential. We'll try to give you the help and the assistance that we can. I'd like to go around one more time and get any final thoughts that you have. This has been an extremely stressful year, and start with Director Herron. You know, we've talked about the pandemic, we've talked about the protests, we've talked about the regular rigors of policing. How has your agency dealt with the totality of this up to now? And then moving forward, is this our new norm, or what are we looking for as we start turning the calendar to 2021?
You know, it's a great question. Let me start off by saying this. There's not a panelist that is sitting on one of these panels today that has not experienced a colleague during their career who hasn't committed suicide. During my 27 years in the state police, 7 of my colleagues committed suicide. I talked to a survivor, police survivor. Her husband, who's a police officer, committed suicide. And she told me something that has stuck with me, which gives me great hope that we can reduce police suicides. She said her husband was a dedicated police officer. He got injured. He found out he couldn't get back to work, and he started leaning on alcohol. And she said he never leaned on alcohol. And it got to the point where his alcohol use increased until one day he took his own life. So I believe that alcoholism addiction is a gateway to suicide. And if we work together as one cohesive police organization throughout the country, we can eliminate police suicides. The stress associated with police work is something that I really, really am proud that Destination Zero has taken the time to recognize health and wellness groups throughout the country. You know, as police officers, we like to have competitions about the best uniform, the best car, the best this. But until Destination Zero started highlighting the best health and wellness units, we didn't have that. So thank you. I think it's important that in conclusion, that we continue to do what we're doing. We learn from one another. I've learned a lot from John, all 3 Johns, about things that we can do to help keep our officers safe. And you know, the main thing I think that has been echoed throughout this discussion is that officers need to understand that we care about them. If they understand that we care about them and they're not just a badge and a gun, that they really mean something to us, we'll have a more resilient police department nationally.
Oh, I think that's a great point. Just letting them know that we care. They're not just an employee. They don't just punch a time clock. They're out there caring for our community every single day. And like I told you, the example this morning that I saw, officers around the country are so caring. They're so loving, and letting them know that we care about them and that it's okay to come forward, so that we can assist them. We can help them down the road. Vernon, let me just ask you, do you have a specific suicide prevention program there in Baltimore? Are you working with another agency? Or if your officers needed help, what would be the first thing they do?
So listen, I give out my personal cell phone to every police officer in Baltimore. And I can see some of the expressions on my panelists, like, why would you do that? I care about officers. I suffered in silence myself. I was involved in a traumatic incident. I was afraid to tell anybody I was involved in a shooting, and I leaned heavily on Johnny Walker to the point where it started taking me down a dark hole. And I was afraid to tell anybody. I couldn't go to anybody. I finally got help through a mental health professional who I see today that helped me through this traumatic experience. So I think it's important to understand our officers know they can call me, they can call their supervisor, they can call our 24/7 EAP service. The main thing we want to do is stop officers from falling off the cliff and bring them back on board so they can continue with their careers.
Well, Vernon, thank you for sharing that personal story. Really, really important. I want to John Becker, closing comments for you, policing and pandemic protest and 2020.
I just would like to say, law enforcement's a difficult job to begin with. And, in these times, I think it's really important that we try to focus on taking care of our own well-being. Self-care is very important. So for all the officers out there, make time to take care of yourself as well.
Awesome. John Carley, Chief Carley, closing comments as we wrap up this great session with these panelists.
Well, I thank you for this opportunity. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that public service is a noble cause. And even in 2020, there has still never been a more noble profession. And we've never been more professional than we have, even in these trying times. So my advice to everyone is have that ability to be able to confide in friends and family and not to bottle everything up inside of you. The morale of our staff is at stake when we're feeling this extra pressure. And it's important that we recognize that there is a lot of support for public safety in our communities across this country. And I remind people, if you could stay off the media and social media at times and just pay attention to going into a coffee shop or a restaurant and somebody's paid it for you, it's just a reminder that the first responders in this country give more than just service. Many of them give their lives. And don't forget that there is a lot of support, and this is such a great and noble profession.
Thank you, Chief. John Scheinberg, Dr. Scheinberg, we got about 30 seconds before we wrap up here. Closing comments and words of wisdom.
Okay, so the only thing that I would add to the conversation is, or I would reemphasize, is stay vigilant, stay aware. The same vigilance that you will have when we walk into a restaurant and our heads are on swivels. Look at yourself. Know when you're getting into a problem. Know when you don't feel well. Be honest with yourself and take care of your colleagues. If you see a colleague or a friend who's suffering, who hey, this guy's having a hard time, or this gal is, I can tell that they're not sleeping well, they're under stress. Take care of yourself, but look out for your colleagues, because sometimes all it takes is, hey, put an arm around someone, or even in our pandemic, and say, hey, listen, something looks like it's not right. You're not feeling well, or something's going on. What can I do? Sometimes that's all it takes.
Dr. Scheinberg, Chief Carley, Vernon Herron, John Becker, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to day for assisting us in helping officers and law enforcement agencies all across the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
guess we're clear.
Probably.
Hey, John, I hope I'm not broadcasting across the whole Destination Zero platform right now.
Somebody will tell you later if you did. I think they cut you off.
Okay. Hey, John Becker,
Yes, sir.
can you send me some? I'm really, I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about the institute that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
The easy email is jsheinberg at Yahoo, JSHEINBERG at Yahoo. My other email is a longer city email and it would take forever, but I'd love to get a little bit more information about that if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to share it with
Good afternoon, and Welcome to our final session here at the Destination Zero Conference for 2020. My name is Nick Brule. I'm a senior project manager here at the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. Today we're going to talk about Destination Zero and the process of submitting. We're going to hear from a distinguished panel and hopefully give you some insight as to how to submit, to learn what the committee talks about when we're looking at submissions. Also, you're going to learn from a number of our award winners to hear about what it is that they've done in their agencies and how it is they became Destination Zero finalists. You heard the previous panel by John Matthews discuss what is in our Destination Zero resources. And if we can't get to your questions today through the chat, again, you can go to the Destination Zero website, and in the top right-hand corner, there's contact, and that will lead you to the Destination Zero at NLEOMF.org email, and you can submit a question that way. In the last panel, we heard how challenging things are and the challenges that our profession is facing. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. I served 25 years and retired as a lieutenant in charge of our traffic safety unit. I then went and did a brief stint at the Washington National Cathedral as the director of security, and then found a posting for a job here at the Memorial Fund. Being a policeman in Washington, of course, I was completely familiar with the memorial. I also knew that they were planning on opening the National Museum, which is where I am right now. I was able to be hired. And in 2014, I came aboard as the Director of Officer Safety and Wellness, managing our grant programs. One of those was Destination Zero. Destination Zero has grown over the years. But the goal of our panel today is to really encourage those of you who are watching who haven't submitted, or those of you who are watching and need assistance or want to learn more about some of these ideas. As you heard John Matthews mention, we have an alumni association, basically, a group of all of our former winners who are available to assist other agencies at the drop of a hat. We can put you in touch with those people, and you can have a conversation with that chief or that sheriff or the head of that agency to find out how they were able to work through certain things. So Destination Zero is really all about pooling resources. And the great strength of Destination Zero is that these are solutions that are coming from law enforcement. We're saving ourselves. There's so many great ideas. You've heard about a number of them today. You've heard already from a couple of our panelists today, and you're going to hear from in the earlier sessions, and you're going to hear from them again in this panel. But it's critical for everyone to understand that we're only as good as what we get. So if you're not submitting and agencies aren't submitting, we can't share the great ideas we have. And we call some of those ideas nuggets. These are simple things from the use of nuisance card bingo to alleviate the stress in dispatchers. You heard about that. You heard me talk about some basic things that you can do to protect yourself while you're on patrol. There are all kinds of little nuggets that come out of Destination Zero that you don't have to have a program instituted to learn from, but ideas like mentorship, like healthy hire to retire. And that's one of the main goals of Destination Zero, is to not only have law enforcement put our ideas together for reducing fatalities and reducing injuries and supporting mental health, but it's really designed to get us through this whole career. We all know in law enforcement what a challenge it is, how difficult it can be. And having retired in 2012, you know, I've often thought to myself, boy, what would I be thinking if I were a policeman now in 2020 with everything that's going on? And of course, here in Washington, D.C., we saw a lot of heavy protests. So the panelists today are going to help everyone watching understand what they did to submit. We're going to hear from a selection committee member and hear about how the panel works. And I think you'll be suitably impressed when you hear about their diligent deliberations. So if I may, let me introduce our panelists. The first panelist is Stacia Hilton. She is a 37-year veteran of law enforcement, beginning her career in the United States Marshals Service. She then rose through the ranks of the Marshals Service, taking on leadership roles. She was in training. She was their incident response commander. And in 2010, she was appointed as the director of the United States Marshals Service. She's also a fellow at the National Academy of Public Service. She's a recipient of the President's Distinguished Service Award. But most importantly, she is a selection committee member on the Destination Zero Selection Committee, and she has been with us since the beginning. So we have a great deal of continuity in our process, and I think that that's really important. Next is Chief Jeffrey Smythe of the Burlington, North Carolina Police Department. Chief Smythe started his law enforcement career in Arizona. He's been in law enforcement for 33 years. And in 2013, he became Chief of Police of the Burlington, North Carolina Police Department. He is a CALEA commissioner, and his agency won the 2017 National Officer Safety and Wellness Award for comprehensive safety. Our next panelist is Lieutenant Gerald Hallert from the Reno, Nevada Police Department. Lieutenant Hallert is a 13-year member of the Reno, Nevada Police Department, and he is the leader of their wellness team. Lieutenant Hallert, interestingly enough, was a teacher before he joined the Reno, Nevada Police Department, and I imagine he brought some of that academia and scholarship to his job in the Reno Police Department. Our last panelist, and certainly not least, is my good friend and co-worker, Larry Cecchettini. Larry is a retired captain from the Yolo County, California Sheriff's Office. He served for over 29 years with that agency. He was a graduate of the FBI's National Academy, and Larry was instrumental in getting that program. If you watched all of our previous sessions, you saw that one story on Yolo County. And the great success they had. Larry's going to talk to us a little bit about that program. Larry was instrumental in making those tremendous strides in traffic safety. And of course, they won our very first Officer Traffic and Safety Wellness Award. Larry was so good at what he did and how he presents his facts and things, we brought him on board. So he is a member of the Memorial Fund, as am I, and we both work together on Destination Zero. And Larry will definitely be able to take you through the process of submitting for an award and be able to give everyone some pointers, as I suspect and hope all of the panelists will. I want to turn first and start with Stacia Hilton. And can you start us off by just kind of telling us about your experiences with the Destination Zero panel, some of the things you may remember in the number of years that you've been with the panel, and just kind of take us through your experience.
Sure, thanks, Nick. It's great to see and great to be here with all the other panelists. Always appreciate everything you guys are doing up there at the museum and especially with Destination Zero. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to everyone. So, I'll say that, we first started off and I think, it was going to be, get down for a couple of hours down there, have a bagel, and have some great dialogue about these different awards. And the prep work that came for it the first time, it was sizable information even the first time, but it has grown, each year. Sometimes the binder is getting unruly, for those of us that still like to print and read. I'm up to 2 binders now, great. But I appreciate the automation aspects that you guys have brought to the table. But, most of all, it was collegiate debates that occurred at the table. And I already knew I was in trouble. I prepped, came in. I had retired, so there's no staff. I was printing my own stuff and coming in, and then comes in Chief Menger, and he's got his book and he's got it tabbed, and I'm thinking, okay, we're nice to have staff again. Not true. Tom Menger had gone through every single detail, and as the debate opened, the 2 of us, as you'll recall, kind of back and forth across the table trying to justify and defend the ones that we had picked. Sheriff Fitzgerald was there. It was just one of those environments that you'd love to be in with you and John Matthews and everyone helped facilitating us and chasing down information because, there were some gaps the first time around. We were like, well, where did they start and how did they get here? Has this been going on for 20 years or this just happened last year? And so as everyone's trying to learn how to fill out these documents and, even as you guys as a group collectively kind of learn what to go back and ask for, you had done a lot of prep work ahead of time to fill in those gaps for us. and continue to do it throughout the day. But the deliberations were delivered in such a manner that even to this day, I still say some of the best meetings I sit in are down there at the museum with Destination Zero, because it's such a healthy debate and argument. I mean, sometimes we're really down in the throes of really defending, why we think the ones that we have selected are better than the other guys. But what we really work hard for, and I think this is important, is consensus. And that's really what a beautiful debate and deliberation is all about, is can we get to consensus? And in doing so, we've moved sometimes because, people see and pick up and have different opinions. We all have different experiences on the job. In the Marshal Service, we're in a lot of task forces. We got the chiefs that are out, we got the sheriffs that are in the room. So we really have a lot of diversity in our thinking out there and what we think, is wellness, what we think safety is. So, that was really my first experience. So, I made sure that each time we kind of get to the table that we're well prepped, because we really have to kind of hit the ground running and start presenting and defending, who we think the recipients are, and until we collectively arrive at an agreement. And sometimes it's tough. It's I can't tell you how close these are. Sometimes it's just unbelievable. And I love the initiative.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that and your deliberations, because for folks listening and attending, these people take this very seriously. And I should mention, she mentioned Sheriff Fitzgerald. We have representatives of almost every type of law enforcement that you could think of on the panel, from municipal to county to sheriff. So we really have a broad range of experience, as Stacia said. And she also mentioned some of the deliberations. Are there any that you remember that were particularly contentious that you could share with us?
Well, I don't know if I should do any naming, but I know that Menger and I were just like down in the throes at one point. I joke about how we had to park our weapons outside and kind of come in, but that non-lethals were allowed for the argument. But I love Tom. He always brings a great debate to the table. But I can remember really fighting, and it was just interesting to be on the panel today because you had sent us some questions ahead of time. Right. And two of the ones that I really wanted to call out was Reno, right, and North Carolina. I'm like, oh, wait, they're on the panelists. That will look like I'm just, doing it because they're here. But yeah, I was really glad to see some people repeat and put in, because sometimes it's just the limited number. The grant, we're thankful to the Department of Justice and the grant that you guys were able to obtain through them. But grants come with a lot of regulation, as everyone in state and law enforcement knows. And in those regulations, we're bound by only to select a few. So sometimes we ask for, repeat, because it's been so good.
And, right, yeah. And then we have had some close calls. And if I can, let me take it to Chief Smythe, because as Stacia mentioned, you guys put in 2016, and Stacia, I'll name them. You had Burlington going up against one of the big dogs in law enforcement, and it was, heated isn't the right word, but there was a lot of.
I say heated. I say it was heated.
And I'll tell the story. One of one of the guys who was working for me at the time, Mike Keith, he really put himself out there, really just saying, well, wait a minute, you guys need to consider. I had to sort of just go, look, Mike, the committee's got to handle this. Let's not interject ourselves in that. But that's because it was very close. Chief Smythe, if you could, you guys put in again for the award and won in 2017. But one of the things about you and your submission that came back for 2017 is that you had made changes. So what you had submitted to us in 2016 wasn't what you sent to us in